Why Canada will lose the trade war with the US. This is something that Donald Trump knows for sure is going to happen. And it's just not Donald Trump. It's the political leaders of Canada who also know what a grim future Canada is looking at. Although, with the current election that's going on, everybody's trying to appear really strong and put up a good fight against these US tariffs. In the short term, this isn't a battle that Canada can win. However, just because we lose the battle doesn't mean that you can't win the war against the US. A few critical changes as a country can definitely put us in a much more stronger position a couple of years down in the road. This is a serious issue for anyone who's associated with Canada needs to be made aware of. Before we proceed further in the video, let's break down a few important points. First, let's look at what the background and explanation of this trade war means, how trade works between two countries, Canada's economic and political blunders, as well as and what the future outlook is, and how this will directly impact everybody who's involved. Let's look at the background and explanation of what this is. Donald Trump has put a 25% tariff on all goods that's coming from Canada as well as Mexico. So the question is, why is Donald Trump doing this? According to him, he's putting these tariffs as retaliation for the amount of drugs that are being flown in from Canada to the US, even though that makes a really tiny percentage of it. The truth of the matter is, an extremely small percentage of drugs actually flow in from Canada to the US. In fact, there's more damage that happens in the reverse direction, where a lot of illegal weapons are smuggled from the US border to Canada that results in crime in Canada. Another common assumption that most people and economists have is that he wants to bring back manufacturing jobs to the US. A lot of goods that are manufactured in Canada are actually sold to US consumers. So, in Donald Trump's own words, if something is being bought by Americans, then why is it that it's being made elsewhere? In his own words, the reason why these tariffs are being put on Canada is there's nothing Canada can do about it. Or in his famous words, Canada holds no good cards. And because we as a country are so dependent on the US, there is absolutely nothing that Canada can do other than comply with Donald Trump's requests. Yes, there are a few counter tariffs that are being put on American products, such as banning the sale of American liquor in LCBO stores, or even the short-lived tariff on power that was being sent to the US. These tariffs have only made things even worse for Canada because the Canadian economy was suffering even before these tariffs were introduced. In order to get a much more deeper understanding of this situation, let's understand how trade between two countries work. Most countries can be put in two different segments. Either you export goods or services to other countries, or you produce enough goods and services for your own domestic consumption. When you take a look at cases like China, predominantly their economy is export driven, which means that China produces most of the products that the world consumes, and this is how they keep their trade in a surplus manner. The second type of economy is, even though there are exports and trade between two different countries, you might have an internal population that is able to consume these domestic goods. A good example of this is India. While India does export a certain segment of its goods to different countries, the population of India is so vast and so huge that they're able to consume most of the goods and services that are produced within the country, thus keeping the economy going. So why is it that Canada is screwed on both fronts? Let's now look at Canada's economic and political blunder. While most countries keep a diversified exposure to who they trade with, 75% of all exports in Canada just go to the US. To make it really simple, imagine if 75% of your business just comes from one customer and that customer turns hostile. What do you think is going to happen to your company? Unfortunately, most goods that Canada does produce and that can be exported are very US centric, and a large part of them are actually owned by US companies. It's not like we have options or alternative markets that we can diversify these goods towards these markets right now. The second problem, when export markets become really tough to navigate with, you can always depend on domestic consumption. This is something that India has done for a really long time. Unfortunately, Canada's domestic consumption was only able to sustain itself due to its record high levels of immigration. And because we've let in a lot of people over the past 2 years, that immigration has gone out of control and has left a really bad taste on most Canadian citizens. This is an extremely sensitive topic. More people from other places moving into Canada, that results in them buying more groceries, buying houses, paying for rent, buying newer cars, keeps the economy chugging along, making companies wealthy. Unfortunately, this system would only work as long as there are more new people coming in. However, Canada has had a really bad time with immigration post COVID, which has led to record high unemployment as well as rising inflation and extremely high cost of living. This in turn has turned public perception against immigration, which has resulted in the government reducing the number of temporary foreign workers and permanent residents moving into Canada. Now you can understand what a tight situation Canada is in. You aren't able to export to your biggest customer, as well as your domestic consumption is also going to reduce. What would that lead to? This is just the start of our troubles here. Imagine an entire economy that is so dependent on immigration as well as housing. With fewer people coming in, the first industry that is being severely affected are these educational institutions. With fewer international students paying in those higher college tuition fees, colleges no longer need to support the staff that they had on payroll, which could lead to layoffs. At the same time, all that excessive consumption that was coming in by these temporary people moving into Canada, those companies are also going to see a reduction in their revenues. This domestic consumption contraction will lead to more layoffs, pushing people more towards poverty. And Trump's tariffs are only going to make things even worse, which is something that probably he's banking on because that gives him a lot of leverage when it is time to renegotiate trade deals with Canada. Remember, negotiation is only negotiation as long as you've got an upper hand in it. And with the US being an economic and military superpower, there is really nothing that Canada can do in the short term. It also doesn't help the fact that the previous Liberal government and their Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had strained relationships with both China and India, whereas the European Union is now opening up new trading partnerships with India as well as China. Canada's relationship with these two emerging economies is in really poor state. If anyone was supposed to get an award for being the most incompetent leader of all time, that'll probably be Justin Trudeau. How unaware and incompetent should you be that you strain your relationships with both China, India, as well as the US, which pretty much explains why he decided to step down. So what's the future outlook for Canada? Is there a way that we can come back fighting strong, or would this be the end of Canada as we know it? As I said in the beginning, this isn't a battle that we can win, but you don't win a war by winning each and every battle. Sometimes you've got to make a strategic retreat, pull back, re-strategize, rebuild, and try and look at long-term growth perspectives. In the short term, if Canada is able to renegotiate trade deals with Donald Trump, keeping him happy and ensuring that there's no economic crash in Canada, that'll buy us some time to remarshal our resources and bring in policies that will lead to better economic output. It is also critical that the next government that comes in has to reduce bureaucracy, lower taxes, and also incentivize businesses to come and invest in Canada. One of the biggest strengths that Canada has and that hasn't been fully utilized is the amount of critical minerals and natural resources that Canada has. It's time for Canada to invest in these large-scale projects, ensuring that we are able to develop new industries, grow our existing ones, and develop new trade deals with other countries. That's why the upcoming elections are really, really critical, that someone who has a long-term vision and growth for Canada, but also understands the realities of how global diplomacy and politics work. What are your views on this point? Let me know what you think. Are things really going to get even worse before they get better? Or is all of this just political drama before the Canadian elections get over? Thanks.